give me extra points.
Well, they need to, evaluate it first.
Oh, okay. Maybe I've been saying something negative about them.
That's interesting. No,
That is true. You were talking about
speaking
them.
about publicizing your list on.
Right.
Yeah.
They may have considered it bad stuff.
So sorry if
Offended.
offended anybody. No, maybe that was a very strong sign. But we'll say it like this: when you find that there's a negative quality, and a lot of times when it comes to marriage, there are real negative qualities that the wedding is no way to gauge how good a marriage is going to be. Weddings are built to be spotless and perfect. And perfect. And only the people behind the scenes know what's not going on, what's not working, and it's sort of like a trailer for what's going to come. But even with the wedding, you don't know everything that you're going to discover later. Plus the fact that people also change. So again, people feel like they're in a prison sentence, like I'm stuck with this person. But it's like being stuck with anything. You have to concentrate. You're stuck with yourself also. By the way, that's also one of those things where people sort of run away from themselves because they try to, but really you can't. So what do? You have to have compassion. You have to build compassion. Learn how to build compassion for something. And understand that compassion is the way to release loving kindness, which in the early Kabbalah was called Gdula. That's why we say that it's like water. It grows. It's like what waters the plant. It allows more growth.
The compassion.
The compassion. If it awakens the loving kindness, it awakens change. So say it another way, that what does the furnace that Avram was in symbolize? So that's definitely not very good love. If the love is like a furnace that's burning somebody up, that's what we call the Eish of Avodah Zarah. It's like the fire of false beliefs and false attachments. That's the main thing. And people, now I'm saying the tricky part without saying it, people connect, especially men, but this also happens to women in different areas. They connect to physical aspects of things. So for men, it might be whatever's on the internet, and for a woman, it might be shopping. Right? It's the same type of looking for fulfillment from an object and using the object as a surrogate for the subjective experience, which can never come from an object. But any time that a woman judges her husband about whatever his habits are, she also has to look at what are my habits with expecting objects to come to me, which today they don't say this. They just call it by a nicer name, which is shopping. But that's exactly what it is. It's like taking the object and saying, this will fulfill me. It's an objectification of my needs. And not recognizing that my needs can only be met with something that's deep and meaningful, and not by an object.
It starts when you're an infant, there's object recognition.
I'm not saying there are no objects in your life, but you can't find fulfillment in objects. For instance, the clearest example of this is you can't enjoy music by buying a piano. Right? It's not the same thing.
You buy a CD.
You can't enjoy music by buying a CD either. Why? Because you also need a player. It's not the CD, right? It's that idea that I can't, and really, it's not the same experience in the end of hearing somebody play and playing it yourself. So it's a whole different level, and it's not even the same experience as being able to compose yourself. Right? That's a whole different level of subjectivity that's missing from the object. So I'm not saying that, don't listen to music, because I think that is important. But in that same way, by the way, there's a very interesting thing that took me years to get this, because I didn't know it could be any different. But I'll preface it by saying that I heard Rav Eliyahu's yortzeit was yesterday. So his son, Rav Shmuel Eliyahu, he wrote a letter, and he talked about his father. So he said that he was very surprised when he was only older that he heard this concept of saying a Dvar Torah at the table.
Yes.
You heard about this?
Yes.
Like he had never heard this before.
Yes.
Why? Because why would you say a Dvar Torah at the table? Everything you talk on the table is Torah. What else is there to talk about? So in his mind frame, there was no such thing as saying a Dvar Torah, because everything you do, that's what kind of house you grew up in. The same thing is with music. It took me a long time to understand when I grew up that most people don't sing at home. Like they don't have this concept of gathering together, whether it's the first meal of Shabbos, the second meal of Shabbos Shidduch, or Melav and Malka with instruments. They don't have this concept of like sitting around. Maybe they do it at camp once in a while, and they love it, but they have no way of reconstructing it anywhere. And it's a completely different experience to sing rather than be sung to. So that's a little bit of trying to capture this idea that objectification doesn't really go anywhere. It's a cheap thrill, you can call it, but it doesn't really fulfill you. So what do you do with that? So you have to. That's like the furnace that Avram was thrown into. If you're sort of like Nimrod was saying to him, if your God is so personal, right? He's not just an object like my God. So let's see him save you, because when it comes to fire, only a personal God can save you. There's nothing else that can work, and that's exactly what happened. Avram revealed the personal relationship that he had with Hashem. He said, this is not just that I've discovered that behind all the forces everything is one. I've also discovered that this one has a direct relationship, a personal relationship with me. And and because of Yaakov. Why because of Yaakov? Because Yaakov is already that it splits into the 12 tribes, Mitato Shlema, and it's that each one has a different relationship with Hashem. It's even taking it on to a higher level of not just personal relationship in the sense of a single individual, but that there are. That's like the problem with it. Say it in a different way. That if you're talking about God being the master of all natural forces, but it acts the same for everybody. Mm-hmm. But once you get to Yaakov, you see that, wait a minute, the natural forces don't act the same with everybody. I'll say it technically. Technically, it's that with Avram, Hashem is the Shem of Chesed. And the name of Chesed is just Kel. Kel just means force. He's the force of the world. Literally, the word Aleph Lamed means a force. Okay? By Yaakov, the name that he's connected to, the name that Yaakov reveals is Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's the name of Tiferet. And Yud Kei Vav Kei is already the personal God. It's Hashem's special name, unique name. Meaning, it's not just unique in the sense that it's unique to him. More importantly, it's unique to every individual. Every individual grasps Hashem in a different way throughout their lives. And that's all because he's a personal God. He's not just a force in the world. Okay, to say he's just a force in the world says, and there's people who see it this way, that the Torah is just a rule book, and just follow everything that it says and you'll be fine. It says, no, what are you talking about? That it's true that the Torah is connected to Hashem, of course, and he follows the Torah, but in the end he's a personal God. And by being a personal God, it means that even fire may not burn you. Why? Because the natural elements which are supposed to act in the same way for everybody, in your case, will act differently. So that's that compassion. And compassion is like seeing the personal nature. It awakens the personal nature in our connection with somebody.
Well, because it's going through the process of the Torah as well. It's really a vessel to discern, a discernment of the love and the direction. And it makes sense that in discerning how to give your love, which is a Gebura thing, would bring out
So you're looking at the sfirot like they come one after another. No, there's 3 different lines here. It might be, but I don't know how to develop it at the moment. It could be that you're right. But.
So what was wrong with Haran? That he also wanted the brother, no? The brother of Haran?
Haran.
Haran.
So Haran apparently only saw Hashem as a force, not as personal. And that was what was lacking apparently. He didn't have Yaakov as a descendant. Although that's not entirely true, by the way. Because his daughter was...
Rivka?
No, Haran's daughter was Sarah. So Yaakov also came out of him.
Yes.
But apparently he didn't have that in mind. And you have to say that at some level, Avraham already had that in the workings, even though it didn't come out yet fully, but it's potentially in him. And Haran didn't have it. Haran is Avram's brother, who also was cast into the pit, into the furnace, and he wasn't saved. The question is why? Because in the end, Yaakov also comes out of Haran. He's also his great-grandson. And the reason being that apparently, in this sense, the grandson has to reflect upon the grandfather. Meaning there has to be that in potential, Avram has already a personal relationship with Hashem. It just brought it to the fore. And Haran only understood what Avram was saying as just monotheism. It just means that in the end everything is one. Okay, I can understand that. But that's not the same as having a personal relationship with the Creator. Those are 2 different things. You can be a monotheist without having a personal relationship. And you just believe that in the end Hashem is just one. Okay. So let's get to the next type of words that we talk about.
Do you have to switch it on again? Or? No?
It's on. So these words of the next category is netzach. Netzach in Hebrew means victory, but it also means to orchestrate, to coordinate. That's why I like
Endurance. It's not like endurance.
to endure. It could be, but actually, endurance is more related in many ways to hod, right? One thing that I got from Rav Steinsaltz, I never got from Rav Ginsburg, and actually sometimes I hear even hints of the opposite from Rav Ginsburg, but in Chassidus you see both of them, is that hod is, I think I mentioned this at least once here, hod is the ability to persevere. Netzach is to conquer, to win, but hod is to persevere. It's not the same thing exactly, right? To persevere is not to give up. It's sort of the opposite of to be victorious, but it's a type of victory, right? Sometimes the only thing you need to do is be the last one standing. That's all, and that's enough to carry you through something. And sometimes it's just enough to just wait, just have patience to wait. That's hod, which is something that people normally don't have. Hod is the hardest. This is from Rav Steinsaltz, and again, he talks about it being passive confidence, or passively standing. But this word of loli kana, the way that Rav Steinsaltz says it, not to give up, I've never heard from him in those words. It's just,
I think I heard Hans Friedman explain it like
it might be. But again, in Chassidus, definitely the loli kana is brought, that I've seen in different maimarim. But this idea of it being passive confidence is a little bit.
I once heard it was yielding.
Sorry?
Yielding.
Not to yield.
not to yield.
Not to yield?
Right.
Yeah.
That's the hod.
Which one is not to yield?
Hod. That's another way of understanding hod.
Interesting, because I heard it was like it's like you step forward with the right leg, you step back with the left leg to make space for the other.
Okay.
So stepping back would be.
So one way of saying it, but the other way of saying it is that the left foot, which is backwards, which is back, let's say, it gives you the stance. It gives you the strength to stand, right? And it pushes you forward. So even though it's not moving forward itself, it's the basis, it's your foundation upon which you are moving forward. So you have to have that in the psyche, this unwillingness to give up, okay, to persevere anyway. Okay, so when it comes to netzach, what does it mean, loving kindness in netzach here with our speech? So it's how to ask for something, basically. How do you coordinate with your spouse? This becomes more important because, and let's say, here's why we can't run away from the word control. Because in every normal relationship, there are things that you have authority and things that you're the one who's being told what to do. That's just how it is. So when you're at work, maybe most of the time you feel that you're under somebody's authority, but it's not entirely true because usually there's also somebody underneath you, right? So if it's at home, so it might be that between the couple there's a sense of having to do what somebody else wants me to. On the other hand, there are those that are under me, like our children or anybody else who's dependent. The truth is that even if you're not like that, there has to be an authority above both of you, and we talked about this. Right? You can't be, and that's the number one problem that people have, which makes it almost impossible for them to coordinate, is that they don't feel that there's anybody above them as a couple. So, say it in a simple way. They always say that that the Jews in Israel, in the land of Israel, are only united when there's a common enemy. Right? So there's somebody above you now that you have to answer to, and then suddenly you figure out how to coordinate, how to cooperate. But until then, it's like a war of authority. Who has more authority than somebody else? So we have to have some kind of achna'ah, some kind of submission to a higher source in order to really achieve a level of coordination. So in our case, that's the Torah. That's what it means to have submission. Obviously, it's also Hashem, but Hashem is very general in this case. So it has to be something more definitive, something that you can hold in your hand, open up, and see what it says. And so in that case, it's the Torah. But every interaction, and this is something that is studied widely in psychology and is the basis of a lot of research that's been done for organizational psychology. And the people who really took it forward were actually NASA, because when you send 5 people up into a little, thing in space, these questions of authority become 1,000,000 times more difficult than they are down here, where there's space. You're sending them into no space, actually. And figuring out who will work together, who can cooperate properly, was one of their main questions with astronauts. So really, in terms of organizational psychology, they took it to the highest level. I think I've talked about it in the past, but without getting into that, the whole idea that every exchange between two people has somebody who is an authority and somebody who is answering to the other's authority is a very common theme in organizational psychology. So you see it a lot. And it's one way of thinking about it. Okay? So let's just assume that exists, that in every interaction that we have, there is such a thing. The authority doesn't have to be that I have more power over you. It could be that I'm older. It could be that I'm wiser. It could be that, for instance, I'm talking about my feelings, so don't tell me what I feel, right? Because I'm privileged to it. And you're not privileged, you're only listening to it, so how can you tell me what I'm feeling, and so on. you could say that in every exchange between two people, there's a sort of authority being exchanged as well. So it's important to understand how to do this thing properly, how to talk to somebody, and with the joke that we said, how to ask for something. How do you ask for something? When you ask for something, basically, what are you saying? You're saying, I have authority over you, even though you're asking for it, even though you're using the pretty please, right, type of language. But you're still saying, I want you to cater to me. And to understand that even something as innocent as asking for something to drink, can you make me coffee, dear? And I told you how much I don't like using the word dear. Use your spouse's name, because they're not a dear. Even that is an exercise of authority. And you have to understand, that's what's happening. So it can very easily, if I don't know where the other side is right now, where they're holding inside, it could become a source of resentment. Like what I said, like before it starts, here it started. Because what's starting it is this request, which is coming from the point of view that you deserve. Right? That you deserve means you have some kind of authority over me. To even, like the word to impinge is not the right one, but what do you say when impose on you? Thank you. I'm imposing on you. So it has to be done the right way. What's the right way? And here is a general theological question that comes up a lot. What religion does God have? So Jews obviously think he's a Jew, right? Because that's what Jews think. He must be Jewish. But, okay. So does he have something? Does he not have something? It's a question. It's an interesting question.
Does he wear a tallis?
Yeah, he wears a tallis. Moshe Rabbeinu saw him. He had a tallis on. But you know what? There are other people that also wear something like a tallis.
What about tefillin?
He has tefillin, except in his tefillin, instead of saying, so nobody else has tefillin. Good point. There's a lot of points like this. And in the end, is he Jewish just because he does all this? So instead of, there you go. There's the word. He chose. If I would have to categorize, again, this is like a theological question. I don't know if it's been discussed enough in different places, but if I would have to begin the discussion, let's say, so I would say, what is Hashem religious about? What is he fanatical about? And I would say that he's fanatical about free will.
You said that.
I said that once.
You said he wants to take, it's the last thing he wants to take from you.
He's religious about it. That's his religion. He created the world for our free will.
All of humanity.
That's already a different discussion. But where it can exist, he's fanatical about it. Where free will is possible, he will guard it. And he won't let it, he'll do everything he can not to let it be extinguished. And we see this, if you want, if you would have to categorize what is the human spirit, in the end, what is the human spirit? The human spirit is to be free. How do you become free? Chazal say, there's nobody who's free except the person who engages the Torah, and so on, that you have to add to yourself the yoke of heaven in order to become free. There's all kinds of arguments about what does it mean to be free? What does it exactly mean to be a free person? But the essence of what it means to have a soul is to be free. Right? When we came out of Egypt, we became free. B'nai Cholin. What does it mean that we became free? So again, sort of like what we're doing here in self-reference, the holiday celebrating the Exodus from Egypt is called Pesach. What does that mean? The mouth speaks. It's the freedom to speak. And it's sort of like what we're doing here. We're learning how to speak freely, not to be coerced by my nature, not to speak how my nature tells me to speak, but rather how my mind tells me to speak. Because the freedom is really by being able to go against my nature, by being able to transcend what my natural instinct would tell me to say. So I'm adding freedom to my mouth. Oh, this is called, in Kabbalah, this is called the consciousness, the da'at that's hidden in the mouth. Da'at de ganuz bepuma. The gan is bepuma. It's hidden in the mouth. There's consciousness in the mouth. But you have to reveal it. You have to bring it out. And you bring it out through these 5 types of loving kindness, these 5 aspects of speech, that you learn how to speak freely, truly freely, free from your own natural tendencies.
You wouldn't speak that much.
What?
Maybe.
So some people, it's true, some people in the beginning when they hear this, so they say, well, maybe I can't say anything at all. Maybe there's nothing, maybe I can't speak. Like everything in the world, you have to practice to, in my opinion, you just have to practice. You have to try. And try to become free in your speech. Okay, anyway, so getting back to this. So the only way to ask somebody without imposing is to have in you the recognition that they are autonomous. The respect for their free will. And so it doesn't matter if they're under you, if they're an underling. Even, I think one of the main things that we learn from our children is that lesson. It's the hardest lesson, I think, for adults to learn. And is until age, 10, 11, children will almost unquestionably succumb to your authority. And then suddenly something happens, and whoa. No. It's around 11.
11.
What, 10? It depends on the child. And suddenly, they become a free thinker. It's an incredible thing when you see it happening. It's like, it takes.
7-year-old has a huge struggle with this.
It might not be exactly yet free thinking. But he's not. He's not yet.
He knows he's not.
He's not.
It's fascinating.
He's not
to
yet.
watch.
And I think the main thing that you see is that that you can hurt them by ignoring their autonomy. That's the main thing that happens. The difference. If it's just a younger child, they don't know to be hurt by it. It just doesn't work for them. They'll just play around with it. But when you begin to impose on somebody's autonomy, they become hurt by it, and that's when they become. That's when they begin to feel that you're taking away from them. You're attacking them, and that's taking away from their soul. You're taking away from their soul, from their spirit.
So are we not supposed to request things of them?
Can you not?
No, but how do you find that balance then between giving them their autonomy and being a parent?
So it's not, I can't give them their autonomy. Meaning, in other words, I can only take it away. It's not that I can really, I can try to take it away, but the only thing that will increase is their resentment. You can't really break somebody unless you...
Taking it away every time you make a request?
No, it doesn't. It just means I'm respecting your autonomy, and I also recognize that this is your decision, whether you want to cater to my needs or not. And there might be a lot of reasons why it's a good idea to cater to my needs. I can explain them to you. And I might not, right? Sometimes I don't need to explain exactly why, but they might trust me for a variety of reasons. Maybe because in the past, they've seen that it's proven to be a good idea to listen. Or I can explain it in terms of you have a a wonderful opportunity to benefit from bringing me something to drink, right?
That means with spouse
that-
and children.
and it's the same.
You can't give a consequence to
Right.
them choosing a different response than what you think they should
Right,
choose.
right. In the end, it's up to what's the real test? The real test is how do I react when you don't do what I told you to do. And that's one of the things that always, it's so childish, but people still do it. People that are, struggling, I guess, with Frumkeit or something else, and they're like, or they want to prove to you something, I don't know exactly what it is. I just had my an older relative do this to me this last week, so it's like sort of fresh in my head. Lightning didn't come down and strike you. If lightning came down and struck me every time that I did something wrong, that's not Hashem. I wouldn't be interested in the first place. In the same way that I would never respect my father if every time that I didn't do what he wanted me to do, he would strike me. Strong slap on the face. Never create any kind of respect or any willingness to follow anything that he says. It's simply childish to think differently. So the main thing that I learned from my relationship with my children, which then needs to hopefully transfer to my spouse, really it's the other way around. First of all, you have to learn it with your spouse, and then you transfer it to your children. Sort of doing it with an adult is easier than doing it with a child, but when you get to that stage of your children's lives, it means that Hashem thinks you're ready for it. And that they're 11 years old and they have this soul inside that's coming alive. It's not the same thing as letting a child run into the street. They got nothing to do with it. We're not talking about these things. We're talking about, for instance, when they can do something for me. Right? It's not about me I'm not asking questions about whether they should eat or not. That's me doing something for them. And even then, there are some limits on what I'm required to do. So sometimes the right answer is just lo zemot, like leave them alone. It doesn't matter. But if you grew up in a house where the parents speak Yiddish, you heard that a lot, right? Lo zemot, lo zemot, lo zemot. Like leave them alone, leave them alone. So it's like sometimes that's the right response, but we're not talking about those things. We're talking mostly about the things about when I'm asking you to do something for me. And when I ask you to do something for me, that has to start from the feeling of autonomy of the person that I'm speaking to. That they are a separate person. They have their own lives, their own will, their own pleasure.
Before 11, you don't have to feel that way?
Before 11, they don't demand it. And again, the question is whether you can I really ask something of somebody who's less than 11 years old? I don't know if I ever asked them.
You shouldn't even ask them?
No, I'm trying to think about something that they could have done for me before they were a certain age. Something that had any meaning even. Not sure. Can't think. Sort of like being quiet, maybe that's the main thing.
Bring you a cup of water, going to the grocery, you watching younger siblings or something.
Yeah, I don't expect them to be able to watch younger siblings yet, so my expectations are pretty low. I mean, what I've seen with this particular question is that some of them know how to do it without me asking, and some of them I can ask from now till the end, until I turn blue, and they don't get it. They just don't understand how to do it. So I have, and it's interesting. I had a son who, until age 11 or 10, he was very good with taking care of his younger siblings, and then suddenly, when he became autonomous, he can do it, but he's not interested in it anymore. And my daughter is just now transitioning, and I'm wondering what's going to happen. She's turned 10 now, and she's great. She does all these kaitanot for all the kids in the neighborhood and whatever. She's really good with it. And now I feel like she's like, now I want to do something with myself. So she's off reading in a corner. She doesn't want. So then I feel I can ask her, but then it really has to come from that place of autonomy.
What if you give her a reward? Where does that place it?
An award?
Reward.
I can.
Pay them. What is that? Are they still doing something?
I'm giving them autonomy. They can decide whether they want it or not. This whole thing of having call it chores is very sticky. I blow up about it all the time at home.
Why don't you?
Much more than my wife. Right, because we have this list, and this list. We've had 1,000 lists over the last 2 years. None of them were worth the paper they were written on. And I blow up about it a lot.
Because you expect them.
Because I expect them to actually do it.
Expectations.
No, here we're talking about things that they can do, and these are the older ones. There's things they can do. It's not like the end of the world. But interestingly, the older they get, they understand by themselves, meaning...
We often have got vested interests, and my kids have too, because they're embarrassed of the balagana.
Right. They can't bring friends over.
They can't allow them all to do it.
Right,
They
right.
get in, but it is very often a sub. They're coming in with their own agenda. They're a
Right,
boucher, but they're
right.
old. It's an older age.
Right.
Yeah.
I found that with the older ones now, what I have to tell them is
Teenagers? What's older?
teenagers. I have to make it time between us. So like we'll wash dishes together, or we'll clean together, or
And then
something
you
like
dump
that.
it on them.
What?
And then you dump it on them.
No, I don't do it. I do it with them.
Well, how
So
do you-
I'd rather spend half the time doing it than all the time doing it. So that's been my solution over the past 2 years. Or like we're helping, right, together. We're helping together. Sort of like, sometimes I feel like I'm Paro. But I don't leave them there to continue. I do it with them all the way through. But that sort of gets them, I think that there is more respect there, because here, I'm doing it with you. I'm not just telling you to do it, I'm doing it with you. So, and that's what I use it for. So that's worked.
My daughter just revealed to me that my husband would, I guess you could say this like in the many years that we were married, that I was upstairs doing laundry, they were all downstairs, and he would turn the vacuum cleaner on and then sit down. And my kids looked at him and they're like, what are you doing? She likes the noise. Brilliant. Really? I've come down happier. Gosh, wasn't so good, but I guess they don't know how to vacuum. I just heard this now. Like, this is 15 years ago. It's okay. But he would sit. I mean, he's got excellent abilities, but most people would maybe do something else. Right?
We can't speak when the vacuum's on. So,
Doesn't he speak?
so he
Just to
didn't
make
speak.
you-
I'm thinking they're cleaning. Fabulous. Thank
Right,
you.
right.
Oh gosh, that's so.
Okay, so that's really, so you have to figure this out. I mean, this is a rule of thumb, so you really have to think about it.
Now, 15 years
But-
ago, even then I wouldn't get.
But in the end, this is not, and here's where it's different than what we've talked about until now. We've talked a lot about having humility, and humility is to understand that to not have expectations. Nobody owes me anything. This is not the same thing, because their humility is before God. Meaning, you don't owe me anything, Hashem, and anything you give me is a present. Here we're talking about not so much humility before other people. This is not like submitting before other people, but rather respecting their autonomy. It's vis-a-vis another soul. We're not talking about how I relate to Hashem. This will be true to even somebody who doesn't have a concept of God at all. Even though I don't know if you can really have a concept of a soul without a concept of God. But to some degree, Western democracies have something like that. We talked a lot about this, if you remember, when we were talking about world, souls, and divinity. So we said there was a whole different way of looking at all our interactions that revolved around souls rather than worlds. Okay, anyway. So this idea of autonomy is very central here.
How realistic is it to feel that way with your spouse when you're a team that are each supposed to be contributing certain things? So if you have expectations that the other person is supposed to be doing certain things, and
They
how
don't.
are you supposed to just look at it as, well, you have free will, and I'm not attached to what you decide to do with things that I'm relying on?
Practical question.
This doesn't come as an answer. It's a primer. Meaning this is not the way to answer a lack of cooperation. It's not you have free will is not an answer to why didn't you take the garbage out. Okay? It's a primer. It means that when we develop our relationship, it has to come out of that space, that we're both autonomous. So we also have lives that are together, but part of our lives are together, but part of our lives are separate also. Two things about this. One is that the thing that I've found that I need to speak to people who newly get married a lot about is their loneliness. And sometimes it's after years of marriage they come to this realization. Sometimes they come to it pretty quickly. And it's sort of like people have this expectation that loneliness, being alone. Marriage cannot do away with existential loneliness. You're alone in the world, period. That's just how it is. Why? Because you have a separate body. And because you have a separate body and you're privileged to only your thoughts. So the level of even the best marriage can't do away with that. That's not going to go away. The question is in what context is it? So sometimes my loneliness can be a huge plus because I don't want everything to be shared. Because we have a very good relationship, but I also need my space. And so that space is something I need, and maybe I need it for 10 minutes a day, maybe I need it for half an hour a day, maybe I need it for 2 hours a day, whatever it is. But it can turn into something that's very positive. But a lot of people experience it as a negative thing, because suddenly they realize that even when we're together, I'm actually alone. Okay. That's your autonomy. It's not a negative thing. If you treat it as sacred, then you can look at it in a different way. But it's such a shock to newlyweds or to people who suddenly experience this some way along the path of marriage, that being married doesn't take away from the fact that you're alone in the world. It's an existential loneliness. It's not because the other person left you. It's not because they have no interest in you. But nobody can take that from you, because that's just how you were created. That's how Hashem creates people. So there's this saying in Chassidus that since the Baal Shem Tov, or maybe from the Alter Rebbe, nobody's alone. There's always the Rebbe, and there's always the Chassid, and there's always an existential connection. Okay. But it's a different level. I don't think it's the same. I don't think it's talking about the same type of being alone that can be a productive thing. And again, the aloneness here is productive because in the end, that's where your autonomy begins from. That's where your free will begins from. It's separate from other people's free will. It's not the same thing, and it should be a source of strength, not a source of pain. Unless, again, what you were hoping to get rid of is boredom. Okay. Once I was told that the most important thing you have to teach your children is how to be with themselves and not be bored.
Oh, it's true.
That until a person doesn't learn how to not be bored with themselves, they can't be not bored with other people, because you'll be bored anyway. So boredom is a state of actually your mind being empty, and you not having anything going on that's important to you. But there's a lot of things that are important to every person separately. What if you take away your computer, your cell phone, everything, all the things that connect you to, these are just objects, all these things that connect you, and then you can add to this your wife, your children, and so on. Are you going to be able to be with yourself?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, but that's one of my thoughts with the new generation. They've never actually sat really alone, because we even twitch on our iPhones and our iPads. And
No, on Shabbos at least you don't.
It actually
So,
does push away that knowledge of
Nachon.
existential
Nachon.
loneliness
Nachon.
that is a defining characteristic
right, of being a human being.
of the early
Of a healthy-
generation. It isn't with the young ones. They don't know they're alone yet.
It means, in this sense, this is the deepest, the deepest aspect of psychological health, is when you can be with yourself, alone, and not hate it.
For how long?
In principle, forever, but
I know in principle, yes.
but it's that's never really how it works. So this is like even just to be with yourself for an hour or two without anything. Anyway, you might say that's the fact that we don't even respect our own autonomy.
Our parents would have
And
taught
it's
us
very hard for us to
that we're
respect other
wasting
people's.
time if we would try and do that when we were kids.
No, not sure. Not sure.
I thought it was a fault because other people were more
Active.
In my family, everyone was more sociable, and there were more people, and there was more
Right, so you
telephones
felt
and
worse.
everything. And I was the one who wanted a bit of silence and quiet, and I always thought that was a very deep character flaw.
Well, I think it's the opposite.
Yeah.
I think it's a very deep character trait
Yeah.
that turns you into an upright person. A simple thing is davening. Okay, davening is an example of being alone. Okay, it's even called in some circles itbodedut, which
Yes.
means to be alone with.
God.
Because I'm not really alone. I'm with my existential aloneness means being with my Creator.
That's not
So, by the way, there's a very interesting thing. When most people go out to itbodedut the first time, they don't know what to say. They're lost. They can't open up their mouths. Why? Because they're used to reacting to other stimuli. Suddenly, when I have to provide the stimuli, where do I get it from? I mean, that's part of not. I think maybe what we're discussing here is that in the end, for me to be able to respect somebody else's autonomy, I also have to, first of all, find my own. Find my own, utilize it, be able to respect it, and to hold it sacred. That this is not some fleeting. This is not just like you called inactivity. I'm not just being lethargic. No, I'm actually doing a lot. Especially, and I would say that this is the Jewish way of developing this, is by going out and either davening separately, alone, or learning, which might be stimuli. But even if there's a lot of people that can learn by heart, by the way, which is a very different exercise than learning from a book. It's something that I can't recommend enough. This is something that's transformative. The moment that you learn something and you know it well enough that you can recall it by heart, and then you start learning that text that you memorized, the results are night and day in terms of understanding, in terms of depth, in terms of ability to integrate, to actually see something happen and transform you. And this whole thing called itbodedut in Breslov, which is going out into a place of solitude and being able to speak to Hashem. By the way, this is different from. There's an Eastern tradition that does a lot of these things also, but there it's like emptying yourself. It's no connection to anything. So they say you discover something very deep in yourself. I believe that you do discover some kind of autonomy, but that autonomy is not linked to God. It's not linked to the Creator. It doesn't come from somewhere. It sort of feeds itself. And here you create this deep connection with Hashem. So in a certain sense, you have to discover this for yourself and about yourself for you to be able to respect and cherish it in other people. But that's where these words of coordination have to start from. They have to start from acknowledging and respecting the other person's autonomy. And then, when things don't work, so we've decided that we're going to, divide the workload this and that way. The first feeling that I have is not one of you let me down. Because you let me down says you're there to,
For me.
right? So, yeah, it's a little extreme, but in general, you're there for me. And no, you're there for us, so you didn't let me down. It's not me, it's you also. And that's the main thing, right? Because you also want to live here. You also want to, so is it going to get better by me ignoring the things that I can do, my responsibilities and so on? No, it's not going to get any better. It's just going to get worse. So one of the main reactions is whether there's resentment, I think. That's the main question. Do I resent the fact that you let us down? Or do I respect the autonomy and say, in the end, you feel just as bad as I do because you're letting us down. You're not letting just me down. What happens if the other side doesn't feel this way? They don't come from a place of respecting the autonomy. And so for them, it's like, I don't care. I'm not going to do my... okay, that's... That's a problem. You have to get to that place. You have to get to that place where both, and I think there's very few people in the world that don't understand this. They might not be in touch with it, but everybody understands this because everybody understands it about themselves to a certain degree, right? That my freedom is very sacred to me. So when I get into something, it starts from that place. That I want to give, meaning I've taken my autonomy and I've said I'm giving up part of it in order to reach a higher goal. So we understand that thing. So we understand it about somebody else as well. Okay. Now there's something very important about children here. I said before that they have to feel that there's something behind what I'm saying. When I ask them to do something, not for me, for themselves especially. They have to feel that there's something behind my words. So the main thing is what Shlomo Amel says. The words of the wise are heard when spoken gently. The sign of wisdom is silence. It's always the sign of wisdom. So if you have to shout, it doesn't come from wisdom. If you have to exaggerate, it doesn't come from wisdom. Like just to use an example, my son just a couple of hours ago, my eldest son tells me, I went out to get a Gemara from the Zal, and because somebody stole my Gemara, and then I got in trouble. So I said, did you say those words to the person that got you, and like one of the Rebbeim that saw him, whatever? He says, yes. So I said, don't you hear that you're like, it's very hard to believe you? Why? Because somebody stole your Gemara. It's like somebody went out of their way. They don't have a Gemara at all. They came and they stole. I said, no, he's smart enough. He's 16 already. He doesn't understand. So don't exaggerate. Somebody took it. You're right. Or you misplaced it. Or who knows what. But with the moment that you make it into an exaggeration, so I don't believe you anymore. It becomes facetious. It's unbelievable. You're taking away from your legitimacy. The same thing is with shouting. Same thing. If you have to make your point, that's one of the problems that I have with education. You're a nice group, so you're all quiet. But imagine that you were all talking. So what do? I mean, this has happened before. So you've seen what I do when everybody's talking.
You just do something else.
I don't know if I do something else. I quiet down. I don't talk.
Right.
Very hard for me to like overcome people with loud speech. It's not because I'm wise. It's just because I'm non-confrontational. I find it difficult to confront
in a
people.
high school class, you can sit there quietly.
Right, you can till the end of time. Till the end of time, nobody's going to listen to you. So there's got to be a trick to get people's attention. But once you have their attention, if you find yourself, meaning with children, certainly you have their attention a lot of the time. So you have to resort to shouting, so you've lost any credibility you had. Right? Even, it's better that they not do what you said. It's 1,000,000 times better that they not do what you said than to shout. Because if you shout, that's the end of the story. You're not credible. There's nothing behind what you're saying. It's just emotion. Because we know that chokhmah is bittul. It's quiet. So the deeper it goes, the quieter it is. Okay? And it's just how it is. That's how we see things. So better not to make your point. Better not to get what you wanted. Better not to convince them. I made this mistake this Shabbos. I got really upset at one of my sons who made a deal with one of the younger ones. I'll give you 2 of these for 1 of that. You know, these deals that they make, it's driving me crazy. All the years that I go crazy with these deals, and then they're always upset because something, and they don't know how to undo them, and then the whole place blows up. So I tried to prevent it. This time I said, no going back on deals. Whatever the deal was, that's it. So that was enough to trigger the other side of me, right? Because he can't get out of it. So I got really angry at him, and I told him, "You just have to do what I said." Obviously it didn't work. The whole thing collapsed, and he ran upstairs, didn't come to shul. The whole thing, the whole shebang happened. He's 12 and a half. So then after everybody calmed down, so I went up to him, and then I explained to him the whole reasoning. And I explained to him quietly, and surprisingly he accepted it. Okay, when I explained it without, I thought, I haven't learned yet. Even let them fight a little, whatever it is, and then come and save them from the fight in some way. Or once it's over, don't interfere. Let it boil over and let it finish, and then talk to them.
No,
I have too many boys. Yeah. No, never too many. But we have a lot of. We have a good time. We have a good time at home.
You have more than one girl or just one?
Just one girl.
Right.
See, if anybody wants to give away girls, we're here. We're willing to adopt any number. Anyway. So this is a very important part of it, of this whole thing of being able to speak out of a place of authority, is to have something backing you. And the only thing that can really back you is your wisdom. And the wisdom is simply heard as something quiet. That's how it has to come about. Okay, obviously we didn't finish the whole thing.
You said you were going to make us angry at the beginning.
Yes, I was. I did a little bit of it. Okay, so let me finish it. So I started out with the fact that objectification happens by men and by women. So by men, it's what we talked about, and I said by women, it's shopping. It's acquiring objects and thinking that this will fulfill me. By the way, men also have this thing.
There's no shopping. There's no lighthearted shopping.
What does that mean?
That you're not doing.
So men buy these high price tag things like cars and whatever, which is just as terrible. But usually it's like, unless they've really lost it, it's once in a while, because there's a high price tag, so they don't do it all the time. They might look around a lot, but not really. But both of these stem from the same thing, which is thinking that objects can somehow, an objectification of people, of beauty, of whatever it is, can somehow fulfill me, which it doesn't at all. You buy it and you feel good for a minute, and then it's gone. I have a friend, some of you might know Asher Crisp, who used to tell me when I wasn't feeling well physically, he said, "What do you mean? Go buy 2 Sfarim and call me in the morning." Objectification of Torah. The same idea. Like, you'll feel better if you have 2 more Sfarim in your But the real thing is that, and this is something that needs to be discussed more because it really does get people upset, and women have this problem a lot more than men do, which is there's no other word for it except for being spoiled. And can I look at myself, can I see myself being in a position of just working hard, not receiving anything for my work? This is a big deal with children. This is a big deal with...
Could you elaborate?
There's a lot to talk about. I'll just mention it in terms of children for a moment.
Okay.
And I've discussed this in different places. I got this from my wife. When you read a child a story, why are you reading them the story? Are you reading it to read them the story, or are you reading it to spend time with them so that after that you can say, I gave you from my time, now be quiet? Meaning, am I giving with the expectation of receiving back, of buying something with my giving, or am I giving because I want to give? So, in a certain sense, this also goes back to how I respect my own autonomy, which is that my autonomy is too precious for me to give it up in return for anything.
This feels connected to where you said the woman is realistic, and that's why the man can have more fun with the kids because it's lighter.
Can. We talked about this.
Fits in.
We actually talked about this, that women have a feeling that things have to be, they have a certain structure, how they work.
Okay.
So how do they work? I make you lunch, I make you dinner, you owe me something in return. Right? There's a give and take here. There's like a certain, but you owe me something. You definitely owe me something.
Mm-hmm.
And that you owe me something, it spills over into everything. By the way, it becomes, the husband also owes me because I take care of the house. So you owe me a vacation here and there. You owe me this, you owe me that. That's at the root of it, it's almost like not respecting myself. Because if I'm giving because I want to give. That has to be like a feeling. It's true that it's much more complex in the real world, but it has to start from that. That first of all, I've made a conscious decision, sort of like what my father used to say to me when he still could say something. When he was alive, he used to say to me, well, you wanted kids. What do you want? You wanted to have them.
Who said you wanted that?
Huh? No, I said I wanted.
Well, my father-in-law says payback.
So, thankfully, my father didn't say that, but he would remind me constantly of the fact that you chose this. So choose to give. Meaning, even if you didn't choose the children, choose to give. Don't make the giving as a cheshbon, like a business deal that we've got going on here. Yeah.
How does this work with the concept of scapegoat and knowing that you need to get paid for what you do, so you don't take it into yourself as pride and all of that?
I said, and this is a very important thing, that in marriage, a lot of the things that we do are not exactly how we relate to people outside the family. But I understand.
With myself.
Right, with myself. A person has to feel fulfilled. And the truth is, you won't feel fulfilled by them giving you back something. The real fulfillment here, which is you're doing your mission, it's not the same thing, exactly the opposite from what you said. If I read you a story and there's a price on your head now, so you owe me something. What does that mean? That I deserve the credit. That will never fulfill me. What will fulfill me? That I read you the story because I chose to give you from my time. I chose to give you from my energy. That's truly fulfilling. I don't need a
I think
scapegoat.
for a woman, sometimes you would have to then go away from the house for that to work.
Okay, fine. Could be. like I said, you have to go back to find your autonomy.
Because of the seriousness of the work in the house. It's just,
And the husband also has to be sensitive enough to see when she needs that.
I don't know.
So what's the part we would find difficult?
The part that we find difficult, again, is that there's this running tally going on, and women expect, you owe me this, and this. And you can't get out of it because, what do you mean? We're doing things autonomously. We're doing things because we chose to do this. I used to call this, I used to describe this to my wife because I didn't have a better way to describe it. It's like because I used to cycle like competitively. And there's something called staying on top of your gear, which is that you push harder than the bike pushes you back. You've got to be able to always feel that you're stronger than the gear you're on, that you can push more than it's pushing you back. And it's a state of mind. It's not necessarily like how much strength you have. It's like, I'm pushing, it's not pushing me back. Because I don't know, you feel this in a bike, like that it's hard to ride uphill, so you go down to a lower gear and so on. Well, when you're riding competitively, you don't do that. You stay on your gear and you push it harder than it's pushing you back. And you sort of have to have that feeling towards the things that you're doing, that I'm pushing them more than that they're pushing me. And like I said, it's just a state of mind. You can always do that. You can feel overrun and overwhelmed by a low gear also. It could be the easiest thing in the world, and you feel like you have no strength for it. But again, I think that it's because it's coming from a place where you're not autonomous, where you haven't chosen to actually do this. But when you choose to do this, I have to make, my wife says, I have to make lunch every day. So it can be I have to make, and it can be I choose to make. And when I choose to make, I can respect your autonomy as much as I respect my own. If I have to make, then you owe me. And you begin to have this running tally of what you owe me. And especially by men, it's like, I work so hard, can't I have... They also have this. But peace and quiet, I want my dinner when I come home, whatever it is. And by the way, this is like the measure for a man to see whether he's grown up or not, is whether he can come home and whatever I have done until this moment gives me 0 points when I'm at home. Can you do that? That's staying on top of the gear at home. It's not an easy task. Again, you've got this running tally. I woke up this, now you owe me so and so. But if you chose to do those things, so you're in a different place. You don't have to control somebody else. All these, if you understand, all these running tallies, they're ways to control somebody else, right? Because now you owe me. Now guilt feeling, right? And that.
No man would say, I chose. He would say, I've been at work all day. I've had to work all day.
What do you mean? Why not? So when I'm having a good day, I choose.
Yes, that's exactly.
When I'm having a terrible day, I have to, and I come home and I'm like, ugh. And that's when the test is. Can I stay? That's when you're tested. Not when it's easy. Not when you're going downhill. Downhill is easy. You're always on top of your gear. When you're going uphill and it's hard to do that switch, is like Rav Arush writes, or at least somebody told me that he wrote that his advice for men is before you come home, eat. So that you're not dependent on your... That's a trick. It's sort of like trying to run away from the problem. But and if you need to, you need to.
To the point where they can.
Right. Because they're all. It might just defer
Teach
it,
yourself, yeah.
but you have to get the principle down. The principle is that even if there's no... I remember Rabbi Sachs, who's a older mashpia in Harnof. He once told us, he was talking on Shabbos, and he said, we were Farbrengening after davening, and he said, my wife is so busy with her chesed that she hasn't made dinner in years. So I've learned to open up a can of sardines and tuna and eat. And he said it with a laugh, with a smile. And he said it because that, right? That's exactly it. Okay, settle. Nobody owes me anything.
You love her for her food?
Also.
I'm saying if you want to really...
Good, but you have to get to that place. And the woman has to get to the place
Or she can make a meal.
where she can make a meal and be happy about it. That I contributed something to the home. It's not because I have to. Sedel.
Thank you.
I have one question on the praise that someone had asked me. Their husband does not like to compliment them. That's in praise, isn't it? He
Compliment,
knows
praise.
that he should, he knows it's easy, and doesn't want to.
We'd have to do it personally to figure out why. Why is, I suspect that he feels that it's taking something away from him.
You expect me to,
Expect me to?
shallow, you expect me to.
No, settle. So I'm saying that it's a problem with their own,
And he knows it, and he doesn't want it, so where is that there?
it's a problem with their own self-image.
It is. So what does the wife do?
No, there's no simple solution. You have to talk about it personally.
And the same person had said, so our arguments are always the same.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
had said, you can't have the same argument, but I didn't remember why, or what the context was. That argument's got to be different. You don't remember?
Yeah.
I have Tansy.
Okay.
What does that mean? That it has no value?
Yes, and
It
that's
has no value.
they can't see the value.
I don't have it right.
They can't. Some people can't see the value of physical beauty because they objectify too much. When you objectify too much, you can't see the value of physical beauty, of external things.
For sure, he chose her partially for how she looks, though. I mean, he appreciates how she looks. He won't say it.
Because
Got to
it's
talk to him separately.
yeah,
That's
100%.
Does he?
Yeah, but you